Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Spencer here from Formly. Really excited to welcome on Angela Frederickson today. So Angela and I used to work together. We're really good friends now. Been really fortunate to kind of have her as both mentor and a friend for me over a long number of years. Both worked in regulatory for a long time. So just happy to bring her onto the podcast and kind of get her perspective and to show you guys a little bit more about her. So I always first start, Angela, just by asking you to kind of introduce yourself in a few words. So let's start there.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Do we call you Dr. Todd on this podcast? Because that's
You
my name for
can.
you.
Only
I
my close
can.
friend.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, I think we have a podcast title actually. Let's roll with
Hmm.
that. So thank you. Thank you again for having me. Goodness gracious. I'm at the phase of my career where I no longer say how long I've been doing this. So I'll let you fill in the blanks there. Here's what you should know about me. I've been in this space for quite some time. I like to consider myself a grassroots regulatory and quality professional. Started in quality, worked my way into regulatory, and have since just carried both that R and Q in equal measure, and brought that into the consulting space where I really am having a very good time working with a number of early stage companies, bringing their innovative technologies to the market.
Yeah, cool. So you started Spark, SPARQ, Spark
Yeah.
Compliance. So that is how long has that been running and kind of what do y'all do there? Because you mentioned early startup companies.
Yes, absolutely. So SPARQ Compliance is a regulatory and quality consultancy. And so we're focused, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're focused really on serving medical device manufacturers with obtaining and maintaining market access. We have a lot of companies today that are working to get into the US, some that are quite hesitant but still working through their European applications, as we all kind of can appreciate. But generally, our key thing, I'm still very much in the sort of client facing day to day operations, but I now have a broader team. And our big sort of, if you will, our focus really is really about helping companies to see the value of compliance through speed to market. That's
Hmm.
really key. I think that's a piece that for quite some time wasn't really highlighted. Regulatory and quality were seen as a cost of doing business, something you had to
Hmm.
do. And I like to flip that idea. I'm challenging that notion and really I'm trying to help companies to appreciate that what we do not only is it value add, but it's a value add at the bottom line and also from a culture perspective. We're really I'm sort of challenging the idea of what's good quality and regulatory service looks like. And I think you'll
Hmm.
remember from our time together, Spencer, I was very comfortable not fitting sort of into that mold of what regulatory and quality professionals look like. It was something I've always really prided myself on that I've now brought into the brand of Spark. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing that not everyone really knows if they haven't worked in quality and regulatory is there tends to be kind of a spectrum of consultants of just like quality and regulatory workers. So there's like the big kind of corporate quality regulatory, and then there's what you're talking about doing, which is like keeping in mind speed, getting to market quickly, being compliant, but doing it kind of like in a lean way, which is kind of what you and I connected on when we were actually working together. That you can kind of see both sides and still like help out clients, but not be like overly burdensome with like their roadmap and their budget and all this kind of stuff. So I think not a lot of people appreciate that, especially people who worked. I feel like I'm going to overgeneralize here, but a lot of people who worked in
Sure.
corporate for a long time, they're just used to kind of like all these processes and things like that, and that's the only way it needs to be done. So I'm always curious though because we worked at a large corporate company previously, but we had kind of like this startup mindset a little bit with how we were trying to approach things and get things done really quickly and still compliant. Did you work at a startup before we started working together? Like, how did you start getting kind of exposure to kind of this mindset, or has it always just been with you from the beginning?
No, I grew up in startups. And so an interesting story is that a week after my 18th birthday, I was looking for what I call, in air quotes, a grown up job. And what that resulted in was me landing at a small medical device company that would later become known as Volcano Therapeutics, which was purchased by Philips. But I worked there as a receptionist a week after my 18th birthday. And now I'm really aging myself, but 6 years later, I left as a quality engineer. So it's this really cool story where I had no clue that I was going to find my career, but it was a fit. It was a fit. And so when I say I grew up in startups, I actually mean that. I was, very much a young person sort of growing up in this corporate setting with all of these people who were just really fantastic. I got some of my lifelong mentors. I found some of them at that company. And from there, I would go on to work for a number of startups before I found my way into larger companies, mid-sized and large-sized companies. So my understanding of the medical device space, the framework of QMS, quality management systems, for those who are less familiar with our jargon, we're very much influenced by organizations with very lean resources, the need to be remarkably resourceful with limited cash flow, and oftentimes some fairly aggressive commercial objectives.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes I like liken it to going to like a doctor. You can go to one doc, like going to see a consultant is kind of like seeing like a specialist. One specialist is like, oh, you need surgery. The other specialist is like, oh, you can just, do some
Mhm.
exercise at home and you can figure it out. So I always
Yeah.
kind of tell people like shop around, find somebody who fits exactly what you're trying to do for that exact reason. So that's really cool. So it started from the bottom. Now we're here. My question for you is, you mentioned this a little bit, but do you have like a specific therapeutic area that you typically help with startups, or are they really like all over the map? Maybe you can give like a sample of some of the startups that you helped with.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing is that they really are all over the map. Even in my own space, I've worked in dental, respiratory therapy, ophthalmic, a ton of experience in the cardiovascular space. I've
Hmm.
delved into SAMD only related to mental health. So they've just been, they really have been all over the map. And so today, what I find is at any point in time, depending on when we talk, I may have, a number of projects that I'm working on in various therapeutic applications. Cardiovascular seems to be bread and butter. And I'm not sure if that's just because of my initial experience, but for every, if I'm juggling, if we're, let's say we're juggling 8 projects, 4 of them might be rooted in the cardiovascular space. And that might also just represent what's happening in industry as well. There always seems to be a
Hmm.
lot of activity in that space, but I am loving how much more inventive folks are getting with respect to data, health
Hmm.
data. And we're getting more of those projects as well, which I'm very much enjoying because of that AI angle.
Yeah. Yeah,
Back
and
to
it's
formula.
exactly, yeah, and it's everywhere now, and it's like probably not the best, not the most clear for how to approach it either, which is also maybe the exciting part of it. It's still kind of the Wild West for that. Would you say
I'm
cardiovascular is your favorite to work on, or?
I don't have, I know this sounds like I'm talking about children here. I genuinely don't have a favorite. My favorites
Yeah,
are usually influenced by the teams. So it's the team that
yeah.
I'm working with, their approach to how they intend to bring their device to market. That's what's usually influencing who I find to be sort of my favorite project. And then let's not forget when it's something really innovative, right? Or it's serving a
Hmm.
patient population that I hold close to my heart. That's when I notice, I can feel a palpable increase in my excitement and passion, which if you can't gather by now, I kind of have that in spades anyway. But imagine that turned up a notch. Imagine that caffeinated, which might be a little terrifying actually.
It's good though. I mean, like I feel like you need that too, like as a client, to be honest, to have somebody who's like really going to bat for you. So, um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And someone who
so
believes in mission. That's really key, right?
yeah,
We have to
exactly.
buy that vision.
And then they understand kind of where you're coming from and like what your milestones are, and getting you there no matter what. So I guess that's a good transition. So what's kind of like the biggest challenge for startups when they're first coming to you? What stage are they at? And so what are you typically assisting them with right off the bat? I know it may differ by startup, but typically at that stage.
What's really interesting is that so often I'm being approached by organizations that don't have their own in-house RAQA. So they may
Mm,
have a really phenomenal set of technological resources. They may have some really, fantastic engineers. You have founders. You have people who get the technology, but they don't have the in-house RAQA knowledge to help craft the infrastructure of the QMS and or establish the regulatory strategy. And so oftentimes we're serving in that capacity. There are
mm,
other times when we're doing a cleanup, right? And so perhaps they had some in-house RAQA, but for whatever reason, the current state of the QMS isn't serving the organization, or perhaps the regulatory strategy needs to be challenged or needs to be updated for current sort of industry standards. And so where, depending on the scenario, what I often find their biggest challenges is in being able to accept where they are. What I mean by that is being open to acknowledging where your gaps are. If you don't know what you don't know, how can you accept what is being proposed to bring you up to bring you to the place where you need to be to serve your objectives? And so one of the biggest challenges is being able to empathize with the person. If, let's say, they don't have that experience, they don't have the regulatory and quality background to know what their gaps are and how to get to a place where they can successfully launch their product. My job is to meet them where they are and to make sure that they appreciate that I have an understanding of where it is, of what currently is challenging them and what's impeding their ability to obtain market access. This is where EQ is really important, right? If you just go in trying to flex what you know, that's not helpful. You have to demonstrate you understand where they are and really appreciate, what they're working with. Are they going to have limited resources for a period of time? Are they going to be able to put someone in place in a quality capacity? Or are you going to need to serve that need? And if so, how do you do it in a way that allows them to be financially solvent to clearance or to whatever their next raise is? So you have to have a commercial sensitivity around where they are, what they need, and how you can fill in the gaps in a way that's going to allow them to achieve the most important piece of the puzzle, right? Which is getting that product to patients.
Yeah, yeah, and there's two things I want to pull apart there. One, that's two separate types of clients. I'm really curious about that, which is some because we have a lot of people we talk to who just want to take a stab at putting something together. So I want to ask you about how how much that sets you back if you did something completely wrong the first time, which is totally fine. Like I know people would just want to try to, get stuff done versus starting from the
Yeah.
beginning. And if
Mhm.
you're starting from the beginning, kind of like what the most successful first few steps are in your mind for kind of getting yourself set up and on the right path,
Yeah.
especially if you're kind of budget strapped. So maybe the first one, what have you seen with people who have started and it's just a disaster and you're coming in and fixing it? Does it really set them back that much? Or is it fine? You can usually kind of play with it in that way to get it where it needs to go.
Oh, that first one is a tough one, Spencer. I gotta say, there's one of the things that I really appreciated are companies who recognize there are some times when you need to go slow to go fast. And
Hmm.
it's really tantalizing to jump in and to just start doing stuff. You're like, look, you and I talked about this before we got started around imperfect action being, really more important than perfect inaction, right? And I don't disagree with that, but I do think you have to be wise. And if you're throwing resources at something and someone hands you a canned QMS that doesn't actually fit your system, it's important that founders think through how resource intensive was it for your team to use that system.
Hmm.
How much
Yeah.
effort, how much time, how much money went into using a system that wasn't tailored for you? So, what I love to do is I love the bootstrap approach. Let's build you a system for where you are right now. We'll add on the pieces that you need as we go. So, rather than try to throw you a canned QMS that you implement all at once, that might just be an utter fiasco because it's just not built for you, let's talk about where you are. You're in development. Excellent. What do you need at a minimum? Right now, you're going to need a risk management SOP that covers a subset of activities and a design control procedure that covers a subset of activities. We might only be building that to get you through design inputs, and that's okay. Because now I can use your resources in a way that's going to be targeted specifically for what you need. And we're not going to be, if you will, creating this massive overhead for your already lean group to tackle, right? We're not setting expectations that they have to be complying with all of these things that are just not yet relevant and applicable to you. And this is where you said something earlier around like talk to many people and figure out who's a good fit. There are so many consultants out there that will sell you a full can system. They're not wrong. It's just that they may not be thinking of where you are at this time and what is really needed to get you to your next set of objectives.
Hmm. Yeah, it's good to talk to people who understand the needs of startups because there's tons of these consultants that we're talking about that when you're talking about canned QMSs, really your QMS is how you run your company. So it's really hard to just make one that fits 75 companies, right, and just throw it out there for people. So that's what you're talking about. You want to have something that's at least in some way customized to the product that you're building and to
Yeah.
the team. Is your team remote? Is your team localized in one place? Like how are you managing your data? All this kind of stuff, super important. We've noticed that too, and that's why when you talk to people, you can kind of get that sense from consultants, right? When you talk to them, like, are they meeting me halfway, or are they just trying to sell me
Exactly.
something right away? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
which
Yep.
which
Precisely.
is really good. So cool. So yeah, so there's ways that it cannot be a total mess once you've created kind of your own documentation, as long as you're doing it slowly and trying to build it in a lean way that makes sense for you.
Yeah, and I
Now
think
let's talk about.
right? I'm
Go
so
ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. I think of how often do we hear in startups and in early stage companies, we're flying the plane as we build it.
Hmm.
We've heard that, right? We've heard that a lot. That I think is also quite applicable to the way that you approach your QMS. Now, regulatory strategy is a different ballgame, right? Regulatory strategy, you need vision. You need to be at that 30,000 foot level to see where you're headed and to identify the potential obstacles. And your QMS is intended to help to mitigate obstacles that might slow your time to market. That's really the key. So we're looking to use the QMS to create a very efficient path to market. That's why I see those two handshaking. So I think there's something really important around. Just I want to highlight this. If you created a quality system and it's maybe not working for you and it's messy, and you have a consultant come in and say, they might say, let's try to salvage, let's try to streamline what you have in place. I think that's fine. And then there are other times when it might just make more sense to say, look, you got to cut your losses here. And let's give you something that really is made for you. And let's learn our lesson here. But let's move on. Let's not try to spend an enormous amount of resources to retrofit this system to you when it never made sense for you to begin with.
Hmm. Yeah, totally, and that makes sense. I think it's good actually. Maybe if we just for a second split out like QMS and kind of like your regulatory strategy, because I think they're two important things. And I think a lot of times when our clients come in, they think I got to do my certification. That's QMS plus like our technical documentation. It's all together. I got to do it all at once. I'm going to do it as fast as I can. But I feel like there's like the right time to start doing both. There's never too early to start understanding what each of them are. But maybe in
Yeah.
your mind, I always tell people you can set up your QMS, whenever. Like it's probably better to do it earlier. And then when it comes to actual like regulatory strategy, you should talk to people really early about that, just so you know, kind of like the roadmap and things that are going to take the most amount of time before you can actually put your device on the market. Do you need a clinical trial, for example, and things like that? So I guess my question for you is like, how do you typically help your clients approach that? And then also, when for you, just in your own words, when is the right time to approach someone like you to try to figure this stuff out?
Yes, it's such an important question that I think the nuance can't be overstated enough. So, when we
Hmm.
talk about regulatory, I want you to imagine that you have this brilliant idea and you're certain it's going to be impactful to patient outcomes. And so, once you sort of have an appreciation for the fact that this is like it's not just concept. It's like I could do this. I really feel confident. It's not just a cocktail napkin, right? Um, you're going to need some money. But to get money, you're going to need to demonstrate this is a viable product from a commercial standpoint. And one of the most critical elements to that is the regulatory strategy. And
Hmm.
so you said it earlier, the earlier the better, right? When you're talking about when to consult someone who can help you appreciate that market access pathway. I'm often talking with folks who are in feasibility.
Hmm.
It's not uncommon for people to approach me even prior to that because they're looking for support with their decks for their initial fund. And so we are literally challenging the regulatory path, available regulatory paths as early as even prior to doing anything with that product in a more formal sense. That's really important because you have to, one, understand what's it going to take to get this product to market. A really important example is if you early on, you need to understand, is this a PMA? Is it a 510K? Is it a de novo? Is it going to require clinical data? These things can have tremendous impacts on the amount of money that will be necessary to bring this product to market. Another angle of it is reimbursement. Who's going to pay for this product? And so these are not questions you can wait to ask, right? You need to know the answer to these questions, because when you go to approach investors, if you haven't thought this through, then that's not going to be a very good look. So consulting with a good regulatory professional who has domain knowledge is going to be really key. The quality piece, it's definitely going to come in once you sort of locked in. Look, I know what I'm going to build. I now want to start to approach the feasibility of this. Even, I mean, as early as feasibility, there is value in having that documented within the framework of a QMS, even if it is a limited, even if it has limited reach, like we discussed earlier. And the reason is because so much of what you're going to start doing early on in your development, you want to be able to take credit for in your submission. The moment you start to collect user needs, design inputs, right? Any of these design inputs, you want to be able to demonstrate they were being collected and within the structure of your QMS, because ultimately when you go to submit, you're going to need to take credit for that. And there is nothing more painful, Spencer, than trying to go back and remember what it is that you did 6 months ago. It's enormously frustrating. I joke that I reserve the right to wake up smarter tomorrow than I am today. It's like a thing that I say. And truly, I'm telling you, if I try to go back to where I wasn't, don't make me do that. I'm smarter today than I was then, but guess what I'm not smart enough to do? Remember what I was doing back then. So document it now, document it early, document it consistently, and let it serve you. And again, these are the things, if we're talking early, I'm going to do my very best to convince you that this isn't anecdotal, right? This is well understood throughout industry. Establishing elements of this QMS will increase your time to market. Getting feedback from FDA after you've submitted that your design, you've not demonstrated that you've met design controls, not helpful to you. You've missed a key verification requirement. You haven't demonstrated you've mitigated the necessary risks. All of these things keep you from getting into the market. Your QMS protects you from that scenario.
Yeah, and I think the important thing that you touched on too there is that regulatory is so tied into each round. It's a long game for a lot of people, right? And engaging, even if it's just a little bit in the beginning, just to understand what are those hurdles going to be. But not only that, what levers can I pull to essentially make my path to market a little bit shorter or a little bit easier, or what can I absolutely not avoid? And that way you look really smart when you go to your investors where you're like, no one else can get, like, this is the fastest path to market, or I've already considered all these options. And even if you're not like doing all the hard work of putting everything together at that point in time, you at least have it all laid out ahead of you. And I think engaging in somebody who can actually workshop that with you is so important, because there's a lot of people I meet who essentially said, "Oh, this consultant said it's this way and it has to be this way." And there's a
Right.
lot of things that you can do, yeah, that it may affect if you're, 510K, 510K exempt. If you want to actually, it may even shift your device class based on what features you put in there. And it has to start really early. So, and I don't
Yeah.
think people always hear that. So that's why I just think it's such a good point.
I,
So,
I want to just jump onto something that you said, which is
yeah,
so important. I love this. There's a really good friend of mine who says, don't let your regulatory strategy drive your business strategy. And I
yes.
love that she says that. I think it's so important, right? Because so often what we're looking to do is understand what is it that you want to achieve. And if they can bring us into the fold and helping us to understand what the business objectives are, we can get really creative. And you just said something that I love, which is so prevalent in these companies who are developing software as a medical device, or devices that have software in a medical device, right? Feature sets. There are these lines, there are these wonderful levers that we can pull to allow us to remain on one side of the coin or the other versus features. But let's be smart about your commercial objectives in parallel,
Hmm.
right? Don't, like, be thoughtful about that. And if we can have that conversation, if they're telling you in advance, here's what we want to achieve, and you can say, all right, here's what we can do with it from a regulatory perspective, if we can modify these features, but let's always challenge against the litmus of what your business objectives are. And
Hmm.
is this still commercially viable? this is where the experience of a commercially sensitive regulatory professional comes in, because they're going to bring that up. They're going to actually present these options to you and have a discussion with you that's very well rounded and not just focused only on the regulatory technical piece, right? We can think bigger. We can think of the bigger picture of how
Yeah.
can we play a role in getting this product to market in a way that's going to truly be value add.
Hmm. Yeah, never lose sight of product to market because some people, I feel like they just think, cool, I got my FDA clearance, so I'm good. Everyone's going to come flocking to my product. It's like you're like every other startup. Unfortunately, you still need to have your market fit, marketing, reimbursement code, like all that kind of stuff. And like I wish it was that easy sometimes. And it is such a lift to actually get there that some people don't want to think about it, you know? So that's such a good point. And I've talked to a ton of investors too that really harp on medtech startups in that way too. Um,
Absolutely.
okay. Do you want to talk about any success stories from Spark? Any like favorite projects that you've worked on or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing about Spark, it's such a passion project for me in a way, because when I started Spark during COVID, so I'm one of the COVID stories, right? Left my job
Hmm.
during COVID, started started a business. At the time, I thought I knew I could be a consultant, an individual consultant, and that was sort of, and not in a, I mean that in a very humble way. There are lots of regulatory consultants, and I felt pretty good about what I could offer. The thing that I'm really proud of though is how it's grown, and here
Hmm.
we are. It was May 2021, but I took the summer off, to be fair. So really, we're truly at about the 3 year mark for Spark. And when I look at the number of clients we've served, the number of people that are now on the team, we have a roster of a little more than 10 like really incredible consultants, very talented people who I trust tremendously. I'm very proud of what we're doing, and more importantly, how we're doing it. So
Hmm.
that's sort of the big high level, what I'm proud of. The project, one of my most sort of near and dear projects, is one in which we got to run through the full cycle of what we said we deliver, right? So we came in to, we basically got some data pitched over to us and said, hey, can you help us get clearance? We didn't put the data together, right? We weren't a part of that process, but we got the data, and so submitted the 510K. And then we were asked to stay on after the 510K was submitted to support the group through clearance. And in parallel, the objective was to establish QMS infrastructure, to help kind of upskill the team to operate within this premise of medical device requirements, and then to, more importantly, get the right people in place so that they could operate on their own. And I have to tell you, when we did that, right, we got the clearance, established QMS infrastructure, put the organization in place that they needed to sustain the QMS for once they launched, and it was time to sort of gracefully phase out. It was
Hmm.
this bitter moment of, wow, we did what we came to do, but I'm going to miss these people.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss working with them. And so the interesting thing that I will just quickly share with you, I found one of my hesitancies around being a consultant was I understood how invested I would get in my projects and in the people that I worked with. And I was worried I'd lose that. And
Hmm.
what I came to learn through this project was supporting a company to get to a place where they could be doing this on their own without me. I felt tremendously, it was tremendously rewarding, and
Hmm.
the relationships that were built were just as meaningful, and my investment in the project just as meaningful. And now I'm not even a part of it, but I'm watching their success from the sidelines, and I still feel remarkably invested in their success. And that's just really cool to see that that was possible to accomplish even in a consultant's capacity.
Yeah. I think that's the important part, right? It's like you are so rooting for them. It's like a team
Oh,
effort, you know? And it's you don't get that with a lot of people, and that's what we try to do too. It's and I think part of it comes too from how close you work with your clients. It's kind of the same for us. It's like it's you're really in the thick of it with them, and like their problems are your problems, and you want to fix everything. So when you come out the other side, it's a totally amazing feeling. So I get that 100%.
yeah, yeah. It's a good experience.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. So now that you're kind of growing a little bit, I'm always curious, do you see there being any areas of kind of like regulatory landscape or, things that are going to be changing a lot for founders to kind of keep a lookout for the next like 5, 10 years? since we know nothing about this current administration and changes at the FDA, you don't have to comment on that. But what we do know, maybe from what the FDA said previously, or even Europe, is there anything kind of that you think startups should be completely aware of as they're building projects in the next 5, 10 years?
Absolutely. I mean, what a time, right? What a time
Hmm.
to be in this space. It is, we are, I have a colleague who I respect tremendously, and she's actually on the latter end of her career. She's retiring, and she has said to me, I'm so glad I'm retiring. Because there is so much changing here that
Hmm.
like she just recognizes the tremendous change that we are going to be facing in this time frame that you highlight. To me, this what she's referring to, and I agree, but on the contrary, I'm energized and excited by it because I feel like it's injecting in
Hmm.
a new kind of level of harmonization that we've been waiting for quite some time in this space. I think there's a lot coming with respect to the regulatory frameworks and how they're looking to coordinate their efforts. Think of like QSR and 13485, okay?
Hmm.
How long have we been holding those two as separate sort of frameworks with for no good reason? Like combine those things, right? They're almost overlapping. But like to finally be in a place where we're going to have QMSR in February of next year. This is right here. This is right now. And so as a founder, I think being appreciating that there are some real efforts around coordination of the regulatory authorities around quality systems, around AI, right? We look at the EU AI Pact and how that is influencing what the US is doing. I'm
Hmm.
looking at FDA leveraging IMDRF frameworks within their E-Star requirements are starting, they're on the verge of promoting some new content in E-Star that's going to be basically making a pointer to the IMDRF framework for elements of the of 510K submissions. And you're starting to see this coalescing of the regulatory authorities in a way that's more than hypothetical because we talked about it for a long time, but we're starting to see those things actually come into place, which is really cool. And the reason that's important is because it used to be a very predictable sort of focused landscape of I'm going to go into the US and know exactly what I need to do. When you work with your professionals, you want to make sure they have their eye on the global landscape.
Hmm.
So you want to work with folks who are at the 30,000 foot level, observing this regulatory landscape and bringing in those their understanding of what's shifting into your regulatory strategy and quality strategies. The other
Yep.
thing is
I
that
think
use. Oh, please, yeah, yeah,
I was just gonna say, I think you're one of the only people I've asked this to that has responded that optimistically, which is why I love you, because this is great. Because everyone usually says, "Oh my gosh, the AI Act is horrible," like blah blah blah. So, I mean, everything
yeah,
you pointed to was so true. So, for those who don't know QSR, it's the FDA's quality management system regulations, and there's an international standard 1345, which is the typical quality management standard for EU and a lot of other markets. And so finally, we're going to have parity with both of them, and they're essentially going to be more or less the same between the U.S. and the EU. And they've been doing essentially the same things for such a long time too. It's just silly that they weren't essentially matched together. So it's a good point. If you can be a smart cookie and ask your consultant, hey, what do you think about QSMR and ISO 1345? And if they can't tell you, the differences or what the impact is going to be, then that's a good indication. Maybe that's not a good consultant. But it's a really good point that we are now, even though things are becoming more complex, it feels like we're at least as a whole, as a global kind of like regulatory approach, we're combining a little bit more harmonization across regions. There's still always going to be new things that come out that kind of disrupt that, but at least
yeah.
there is like flavors of collaboration between it, and which is really exciting at least in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. You and I joke about being golden retrievers, right? So there's like this element of that. But here's the way that I see it. I see it as someone has to put a stake in the ground. Someone needs to be the lead, right?
Hmm.
So the EU is saying, look, someone's got to be brave enough to go first, and we're gonna put our stake in the ground, and then we can all sort of then pivot based off of that, and that's going to take time. But if no one takes that initial step, how do we get to a
Hmm.
place where we can start now? MDR was a whole hot mess, and I'm going to hope that they learn their lesson in some way from MDR, right? Because you would ask me to describe myself, I'd say I'm an optimist by nature.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's a lot to be learned there. But I also see things like the way that we're using the increased use of databases, things like eStar, things like the portals. We are moving to a place where they're working to make it more efficient to get these regulatory submissions in front of the regulators and to provide more additional guidance. Think of all the guidances that FDA released in just
Hmm.
2000 between 2023 and 2024. It's remarkable. That is so useful to industry. So there's an increased transparency in the expectations, while there's also increased uncertainty based on sort of the environment as a whole. I do believe that there are active steps being taken to help increase the transparency between regulator and industry. In Europe, we know that we've needed to calibrate to MDR, but when I imagine if you and I were too young to remember this, but I imagine the same thing happened,
Hmm.
with MDD,
Yep.
right? There's going to be waves. You have to sort of ride out those waves in order to be able to find stasis. So I think for founders to appreciate, yes, we're in a time of great uncertainty, but here's what you need to know. This is why it makes such a difference to have someone who has been in this space, who understands the fundamental the fundamental purpose of these regulations, how they are interpreted, and historically what has been accepted. Because yes, there are changes, but ultimately there's a pretty basic framework that we work within, which is making
Hmm.
risk-based decisions. A
Hmm.
good regulatory quality consultant is going to go back to the fundamentals, apply those fundamentals, and then look at the way that we navigate this more current sort of framework and use their historical understanding of what it means to have good QMS or a strong regulatory submission and fit that into the current framework. But this isn't just about using you can't just like pick this up and read a book and know how to have a good QMS. There's a lot of historical sort of understanding of what good looks like that goes into creating a good system
Yeah.
and
And
finding the tools to make it
yeah,
efficient.
and it's like it's personal experience too, you know? And that's the unfortunate truth a lot of times is like how are auditors going to respond to this? Well, we've seen a lot of it, so we can actually help you with that, but it's hard to you can't just pick a book and read about it, right? Yeah, that's exactly the point. So,
Exactly. Yeah, and I
um
appreciate what you guys are doing because I think what you're doing is you're trying to inject that into this tool and you're keeping it alive, right? With
yep.
this knowledge, you're pairing it with human knowledge, with an understanding of what's happening in the industry, and you're translating that into the tool, which I love that that's the angle because it appreciates that this is
Yeah.
not a static environment. So you're embedding the
Hmm.
dynamic sort of nature of this process into the tool, which I think is precisely, Spencer, what we need.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that is exactly
Yeah.
what we're trying to do. So that's nice. It is going to be really interesting, kind of how it plays out too, because the more audits we go through, the more we can update everything and make it kind of more like the most compliant version of whatever our QMS and technical documentation is, right? So I think
Exactly.
everyone benefits from that. Not only startups, but like regulators too. They're going to see like exactly what they want to see on the next audit. That's going to be great for them. So I think everybody wins. So. Speaking of which, and not to plug myself, but what is your favorite quality or regulatory tool? Do you actually use any at Spark, or are you old fashioned with the Word docs and the Excel files?
This is where cough, cough, formally would really come in handy. I got to tell you, there aren't a lot of great tools. Obviously, you have the regulatory intelligence tools, obviously, but I think you guys are
Yeah.
filling in a really important gap, and it's a part of why I'm so excited to just observe your success and to cheer you guys on from the sidelines. I think there's a tremendous need for what it is that you're
Hmm.
doing. If you were to ask me what my favorite tools are out there, this is like the least sexy response I can give you. When Trello and Smartsheet are my like most used tools, do we see the problem here? Yeah, and Formally has a solution. I know this. Formally has the solution, and so I'm eager to sort of witness your evolution here. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so sad. It's so sad.
Yep. Yep. I mean, that's why we started it, right? I was shocked that there was nothing better. So
Yeah.
that's good. Good answer. No, I didn't pay her any money for this, by the way.
I was
Okay.
going to say, let's be clear, you did not pay me anything to say that. That was fully organic, people. Fully organic.
Perfect. So we are now in our speed round. So I'll just ask you a few quick follow-up questions. So kind of on the same vein, do you have any like productivity tools or apps or anything that it doesn't even have to be for that, just day-to-day life stuff that you cannot live without?
I mean, if I'm telling you, if I didn't have Calendly, I'd be screwed. As a consultant, I have, 5 different calendars that I'm managing. It is king in my world. So Kings, and then anything that allows me to collaborate, right? So DocuSign, Teams, I mean, I'd be paralyzed without them. I'm working with clients all over the world, and so we
Hmm.
very much are reliant on good, good collaboration tools, which is key.
Hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. Is there a book or resource, a website, or a person that you think everybody should follow, whether they're an entrepreneur, consultant, or just in life?
I was exposed to design thinking, gosh, a number of years ago, and design thinking in healthcare has become, if you will, for me. There's a rally cry as far as I'm concerned around it's developing technology and devices based on what your users need, right? So empathizing with your users and their perspectives, translate this to patients and their perspectives. I cannot emphasize enough the criticality of this in our space. I think as we look more and more to establishing technologies that are all about data, right? We're very focused on data right now. Design thinking, I can see playing such a tremendous role in this, and I'm very hopeful that it will continue to sort of spread throughout our space. I think there's also, even outside of that, for us, right? Design
Hmm.
thinking in terms of the way that we're developing the tools that these folks are going to use. I can just see
Yeah.
tremendous value in that as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that's like it all started kind of in the strictly product space, right? But yeah, once you kind of bleed those approaches over to every single type of business aspect, I feel like I do agree with that. I've been reading a ton of business books now and have noticed the exact same thing. It's actually kind of like life
Yeah,
advice a little bit, which is kind
it
of
really
nice.
is.
But yeah, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool. So is there a
yeah.
specific book?
It's so there's I was going to say there's design thinking in healthcare. I think there's one by Ellen
Right.
Lipton. There's another
Cool.
Annie Makarinen. So there are some really good ones out there. But there's like what's nice is that you can get a lot on this subject. And so depending on what angle you're approaching it from, I think as an entrepreneur, even just thinking of it from the perspective of my clients, and really empathizing with what
Yeah.
their needs are when I go in to build a QMS, right? Think of this, designing a QMS based on the users and their perspectives. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like psh, mic drop, right? Of
Literally.
course, we're always going to be considering the regulations, but to really be able to bring that, and this is what I mean by branding. Can you tailor fit something? What does it mean to do that? We have to be able to
Hmm.
empathize with your users and their perspectives. So, design thinking, Spencer, I am a big, big fan of.
Love that. I love that. That's really good. Uh, any quote or practice or action or sport or anything that inspires you?
There's something I heard a very long time ago. I have not heard, I read it. And it's a quote that I love, which is that there's no such thing as luck. There's only preparation meeting opportunity. And this is something I think I've felt, from a very young person. I have felt this play out over and over again in my life. And as I continue to sort of delve into new scary spaces in my business, I love coming back to that. I love the idea that my job is to be prepared so that when the opportunity presents itself, I can run through that door.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, have the courage to do it too, you know? That's the big thing too. So
Absolutely.
that's cool.
Absolutely.
Love that. Any other startup idea that you're excited about working on but you haven't started?
Ah, you know how our brains work, Spencer.
I
We
know you have a bunch. Yeah.
there
Top
is a
one,
there is,
maybe.
there is a list. Okay, there is. I think I literally started. You know how like the notes in our phones are basically the windows into our soul. We like anything that pops up here goes into the note. So there is a note in my phone that has a list. I want to say there are about 9 ideas on it right now. And I'm really excited about them. Nothing I can share here, but here's what I will say. I'm currently just working through the idea of imperfect action is better than perfect inaction, right? That's
Hmm.
important. And also just looking to tap into people who are good at strategy, people who can help me take these ideas and help me to see, because so many of them overlap. And so I'm looking right now to work with a really bright person who can help me take these ideas and to establish to map out a plan for what's the order of execution and how can one support the next. So no, my brain is busy. I joke about how many tabs I have open at any one time. And I
Yeah.
don't know, so I can't imagine another way to live. There's so many tabs open that the goal is
Yeah.
to spend enough time on each one to help move them forward, right?
we'll do a podcast repeat when you start the next company, So get
I
your
like
take
it.
on that one.
Very
Love
good.
it. Well, cool. This was amazing. I always love talking to you, Angela. Thanks for giving us some insight on what you do, SPARQ Compliance, kind of your journey to this point, and how you're helping your startups get to market and through approvals. Where can our listeners find more about you and SPARQ?
SPARKcompliance.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Angela Frederickson. And I'm not going to repeat the LinkedIn URL, they're too complicated. But I really, truly, it's my pleasure, Spencer, to just talk with you today, but more importantly, to watch what you're doing in this space. I am so proud of you and so excited for what you guys are doing. And I look forward to being one of your biggest fans. When I'm using the tool, I can sing your praises to everyone that I know. So please keep me posted on that.
I will. Yep, definitely. Thanks, Angela. And we'll put the links in the show notes and everything for everybody so you can find her there. So, all right.
Perfect.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. See you.
Bye.